Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to talk. I'm going to talk about transitioning Europe and the world entirely to clean renewable energy. And so to do that, let me first share my slides. So first, I'm going to talk about not only transitioning, but why we don't need a miracle technology to do that. We have all the technologies we need to transition the world entirely to clean renewable energy. And first of all, I want to talk about why we want to transition. From my point of view, it's not only a climate problem. Global warming will cost on the order of $30 trillion per year by 2050, but it's also an air pollution problem. There are 7 million people who die each year worldwide from air pollution, including several hundred thousand in Europe. And this costs the world today on the order of $30 trillion per year in terms of statistical cost of life. In addition, energy security is a third problem we're trying to solve. Fossil fuels are limited resources. They will run out over time, and that will result in energy price increases and economic, social, and political instability. In addition, as we know, some countries have monopolies of energy over other countries, and that causes energy insecurity. And there are several other types of energy insecurity problems that the world faces. So our solution is to electrify all energy and provide that electricity with just wind, water, and solar. So there are four main energy sectors. There's electricity, transportation, building, heating and cooling, and industry. And for transportation, for example, we go primarily to battery electric vehicles and some hydrogen fuel cell vehicles for long distance transport. For buildings, we would use electric heat pumps in individual buildings and district heating and cooling for many situations when in dense cities. And in those cases, we provide geothermal and solar heat in some cases, but also large scale heat pumps to provide district heating and cooling. For industry, we'd go to electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, dielectric heaters, electron beam heaters. And all of this electricity for industry would be powered by just wind, water, and solar. In fact, all sectors, we'd be using onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, geothermal electricity, hydroelectricity, and some small amounts of tidal and wave power. Of course, you need storage with 100% wind, water, solar, because the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So we need electricity storage, heat storage, cold storage, and also hydrogen. So the types of electricity storage options today are concentrated solar power with storage, pumped hydro, existing hydroelectric dams, batteries, flywheels, compressed air storage, gravitational storage with solid masses. Well, and also I didn't mention hydrogen fuel cells can be used for electricity storage, or hydrogen with fuel cells. For building heating, there's water tank storage and underground storage in boreholes, water pits, and aquifers. For cooling, there's water tanks, ice, and some underground storage. And also we can store heat in building materials. And hydrogen is a form of storage. Well, before I go on and kind of synthesizing the system, we hear a lot about hydrogen. So I want to just say, in my opinion, what are the good and bad sources and uses of hydrogen? Well, the only good source of hydrogen, in my mind, is green hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced by electrolysis, where the electricity comes from just wind, water, and solar. Not good is gray or blue hydrogen, which is from natural gas without and with carbon capture, respectively, or black and brown hydrogen, which from coal, or pink hydrogen from nuclear electricity, or turquoise hydrogen, which is also from natural gas. For uses, good uses are for long distance transport, such as long distance aircraft, ships, trains, trucks, military vehicles, using fuel cells, so not combusting the hydrogen. Also in industry, certain industries such as ammonia and steel manufacturing, and for both electricity and heat with fuel cells in remote microgrids, and in some cases, grid electricity. But for most grid electricity, batteries are more efficient and actually cost less per unit discharge of electricity compared with fuel cells. But we've been doing studies on this, and we find that batteries are generally better for grid electricity. There's some cases where using batteries plus fuel cells are useful for grid electricity. But there's never a case, or hardly ever a case, when just fuel cells and no batteries are useful. Bad uses of hydrogen, all other transports, vehicle transport, such as passenger vehicle transport, heating buildings is not useful, and burning hydrogen, as I mentioned, and most cases for grid electricity. Well, you might ask, well, why not carbon capture? Why not direct air capture? Why not small modular nuclear reactors? Why not bioenergy? Why not non-hydrogen electrofuels? Why not geoengineering? Well, very briefly, since I only have a few minutes, carbon capture always requires energy and it requires equipment. That energy, even if it comes from renewables, prevents that renewable energy from displacing a coal or natural gas plant, and it's air pollution, it's mining, it's infrastructure, and so therefore allows the fossil fuel industry to continue. And what happens to that CO2 after it's captured? Well, 75% is used for enhanced oil recovery. During that process, 40% of the CO2 goes right back to the air. So basically all carbon capture does is it takes CO2 out of the air, but you get more CO2 removed when you use that energy for the carbon capture equipment just to replace the fossil fuel power plant or other type of plant. Same with direct air capture. All it does is take CO2, but therefore it's an opportunity cost that allows fossil fuels and its air pollution and its mining and its infrastructure to continue. Small modular reactors, well, they're not much better than large reactors. Large reactors are expensive. They cost 15 times the capital cost in liberalized markets now per unit capital cost per unit installed nameplate capacity compared with new wind or new solar, and about 8 times the levelized cost of energy. And they take now 17 to 21 years between planning and operation in the US and Europe, and even in the most advanced in countries that have the fastest installations of nuclear, it's still taking 10 to 20 years between planning and operation. And that's not just construction time, that's also planning time. And so new wind or solar is taking 1 to 3 years. So you're spending a lot more for something that takes a lot longer to install. And so it's not useful to have a technology that's not available for 10 to 15 years. Or longer compared with wind or solar when we need to solve 80% of the climate problem in 7 years and 100% ideally by 2035 to 2050. And that doesn't even talk about that doesn't even affect the other problems with nuclear, including meltdown risk, waste risk, nuclear weapons proliferation risk, uranium mining risk, and the fact that it results in 9 to 37 times the CO2 per unit energy than wind power. So that's large reactors. Small reactors, they have the same problems, except they could be more expensive, they could take just as long, they could have the same risks. So anyway, that's not on the table in terms of our solutions. Bioenergy, you still burn it. Non-hydrogen electrofuels, you still burn them, creating air pollution. And the electrofuels, you need carbon capture, which has the same problems I just mentioned before. Bioenergy also, depending where it's coming from, lots of land, lots of water, but the air pollution is not carbon free. Geoengineering is just masking the problems and doesn't actually solve anything. It just creates side effects and just allows the problems to linger. But can we transition the world to 100% clean renewable energy for all purposes? Well, we've developed plans for 145 countries, and here's kind of a summary of the plans. In 2018, the end-use power demand among all these countries, which represent 99.7% of all world emissions, is 13.1 trillion watts or terawatts. That demand is expected to go up to 20.4 terawatts in 2050. But if we electrify everything and provide the electricity with wind, water, and solar, the demand for energy goes down about 56% for 5 reasons. One is the efficiency of battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles versus internal combustion engine vehicles. Then there's efficiency of electrified industry, the efficiency of heat pumps over combustion heaters, eliminating fuel mining. Fuel mining and processing and transport takes 11.3% of all world energy, and we'd eliminate that need because the wind comes right to the turbine, solar comes right to the panel. We don't need to mine fuels continuously. And then energy efficiency improvements beyond business as usual. These add up to 56% reduction in power demand before changing our habits. And well, so here's a timeline. Well, this shows the same information, but on a timeline. So from 2020 to 2050, if we don't do anything, the power demand goes up, the average power demand goes up by 2050 significantly. If we electrify and go to wind, water, solar, we go down those 5 shades of colors to the 100% wind, water, solar line. And then we want to provide by 2050, 100% of this wind, water, solar with wind, water, sorry, 100% of this energy with wind, water, and solar. And this chart shows an 80% transition by 2030, which is what we need to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming. Now, if we can get 80% by 2030, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to get 100% by 2035, and that's what this chart shows with the same endpoint in 2050. Well, as I mentioned, we developed plans for all these countries, and then we did grid stability studies, breaking the countries up into 24 world regions. And this shows the results in terms of how much land is required to transition. Well, first of all, we don't need new land for offshore wind or tidal and wave power, no new land for rooftop PV. There's no new hydro in these plans. It's existing hydro, small amounts of geothermal. So the only new land is with onshore wind, and that's spacing between wind turbines that can be used for multiple purposes, and also utility PV plus CSP, which is basically footprint that you can't use for other purposes. So you can see worldwide, the onshore wind and utility PV and CSP take up 0.53% of the world's land. So that's half of 1%. In Europe, it's about 1.12%. In the US, it's just less than 1%. To put that in perspective, in the United States, the fossil fuel industry occupies 1.3% of all US land area. So we think we would actually reduce land requirements. And the difference is, like in the US, for example, there are 50,000 new oil and gas wells drilled every year. And we have 1.3 million active ones and 3.2 million abandoned ones, and the millions of miles of pipeline. So you need to continuously take up more and more land with fossil fuels, whereas a wind, water, solar infrastructure, there's an initial growth that's large, and then the growth after that is relatively small. It just has to keep up with population and energy requirements. We don't need to continuously mine for fuels every year for energy. What about grid stability? As I mentioned, we broke the world up into 24 regions and found that we could keep the grid stable in all 24 regions. This shows Europe, for example, and we did individual countries in Europe as well. And this shows over a 3-year period on the top that we can match power demand with supply continuously, and this is at a 30-second resolution. And the bottom shows a 100-day period each hour during that 100 days, that we can keep the grid absolutely stable. What's the cost of this? Well, worldwide, the cost is about $62 trillion, US about 9 trillion, China's 13 trillion, Europe's about 6 trillion. This is the cost of a worldwide Green New Deal to electrify everything and provide the electricity with wind, water, and solar. Well, but a better way to look at it is, what are the annual costs of energy now and in the future versus a wind, water, solar world? Well, the energy cost today is about $11 trillion per year. That's what people spend on all energy. And that's expected to go up to close to $18 trillion per year by 2050. The health costs of business as usual fossil fuels in 2050 is expected to be over $30 trillion per year, and the climate cost as well. So the total social cost is about $83 trillion per year. But if we go to wind, water, solar, we eliminate the health and climate costs. Our energy needs go down 56%. But the cost per unit energy is also expected to go down another 15%. So we get a 63% reduction in the energy cost, 92% reduction in the social cost. It's a no-brainer. It's just an amazing cost reduction by transitioning entirely away from fossil fuels. Finally, a little bit about policy. Well, we've been developing these energy plans since 2009. This was our first one it was a worldwide plan, not looking at individual countries in 2009. And the conclusion at the time was, while it's technically and economically possible to transition by 2030, social and political barriers make a complete transition more likely by 2050, with 80% by 2030. And we still believe that today, even though time has passed. A lot of things have become favorable, including lower costs of energy. Electric vehicles are now prevalent. Heat pumps are now lower cost. We're starting to tackle other sectors. So there's a lot of good news. But the transition is still very slow. However, there are 62 countries that have committed to 100% renewables. Most of them are small countries, but that is progress. And again, this is all only in the electric power sector. The only country that has committed to 100% renewables in all sectors is Denmark. So we need all sectors to be electrified and commitments in all these sectors. There are over 400 companies worldwide, including 8 of the 10 biggest, which are in blue here, that have committed to 100% renewables across their global operations. They have been driving lots of change as well. In the United States, there are 19 states and territories that have passed laws or executive orders to go to 100% renewables or effectively 100% renewables by different years. And so that's good. But it turns out that the states that are not committing are actually the ones who have the most wind and solar. Most of them have the most wind. I mean, 9 of the 10 biggest states in terms of wind power, the fraction of their electricity, are states that do not have commitments because they have such big wind resources, plus the costs are very low. There are over 180 US cities now committed and county committed to 100% renewables worldwide. There are over 400, so that's really good as well. There are actually 16 countries and US states that are near or above 100% of their annual electricity generated or consumed from wind, water, solar. I'll even mention South Dakota in the US. 126% of the electricity consumed in South Dakota is provided by wind, which is 77%, and hydro, and all the extra is exported. They also produce fossil fuels that are exported. We need 100% of the generation and the consumption to be renewables, but there are examples of both production being 100% and consumption being 100% here. So to summarize, and we looked at jobs as well, we think we can create 28 million more long-term full-time jobs than lost worldwide by a transition. We only need on the order of 0.5% of the world's land worldwide to transition. We'd avoid 7 million air pollution deaths per year. We'd slow, then reverse global warming. We think the grids can stay stable throughout the world with 100% renewables. The annual energy costs are much less. The social costs are even lower than with fossil fuels. And finally, if you want more information, these links provide, there's a new book mentioned, No Miracles Needed, which is basically on how we can solve this problem of the air pollution, the climate, and the energy security problems together with the existing technologies. We have 95% of what we need, and we know how to do the rest. So we do not need miracles. We should deploy what we have and on a large scale. So that should be our focus, deploying existing technologies to the greatest extent possible. And if we do that, we have the best chance of solving this problem in my mind. Thank you very much for your attention.